CBS 46 News presents Public Affairs on Peach.
Good morning to you and welcome to Public Affairs on Peach. I'm Rebecca Schramm, and this week we are talking about the push for a victims' rights law in Georgia. It would be known as Marsy's Law. And here's some background from a couple who knows all too well the struggles families go through after a crime.
She walked into a room, the whole room lit up.
Elaine and Gordon Rondo of Marietta think about their daughter Renee every day. She was a world traveler who spoke 4 languages. She was 29 and working in Chicago in 1994 when she was attacked and murdered one night as she returned to her apartment. During the search for the killers, Renee's friend and boyfriend spoke with a local news reporter.
She was very accepting, very open to ideas, and hard-driven. She was a very good person.
The custodian found her the next morning strangled in her bathroom.
A jury eventually found Andre Griggs and Benita Johnson guilty of Renee's murder. Griggs is serving life, Johnson 60 years.
I wake up in the morning and I see her with her toe tag on in the morgue with her long hair.
Obviously an emotional issue for me.
The Rondos have joined other victims' families in a push to put some teeth into Georgia's Crime Victims' Bill of Rights. Known as Marsy's Law, it would guarantee that victims' families are notified about hearings and other major developments. It would give them a voice in certain proceedings, and it would be enshrined into the state constitution. The Rondos hope it will give Georgians rights they didn't have.
I think Marsy's Law provides a basis to begin that change.
And joining me now is Ann Casas. She's the state director of Marsy's Law in Georgia. And Sabrina McKenzie, she is the founder of the National Task Force Against Domestic Violence. I want to thank both of you for being here today. Now let's start with this, because the victim in that case that we just showed you was Renee. The name of this proposed law is Marsy's Law. So let's start with this. And tell me, who was Marsy?
Sure. Marsy was a college student. She was 21 years old. Her boyfriend broke up with her. She went to console him because he was threatening to kill himself, and when she walked in, he shot and killed her. And so what happened to their family is they were not afforded a lot of notification during the process. They had gone to her gravesite one day, and they walked into a grocery store afterwards, and they ran into the boyfriend, who was later convicted of murdering her, but they ran into him, and they were obviously shocked that he had been allowed released on bond, and they had not even been notified of that. And that's what started their family on this process of wanting to make sure victims of crime are afforded notifications during the whole entire process to make sure they're made aware at every point what is happening in the case that had to do with their loved one or with themselves.
So Marsy's brother and some other family members helped launch Marsy's Law, correct?
Yes.
And several other states, Sabrina, have picked this up, but not Georgia.
Exactly.
Right?
Right. So 41 states have instituted Marsy's Law as it relates to the Constitution. They've adopted it in their Constitution, and Georgia is far behind on just actually the adoption and making sure that it's a bill, it's a constitution, and it's not just a statute. And what that looks like, what we've noticed, there's a young lady named Bridget Flowers in Macon, and what happened was her boyfriend, fiance, beat her up inside of Walmart. This happened one day. The next day, he was on probation because of a technicality. 8 days later, she was dead. And when they asked the DA what happened, she simply said, you know, it was a matter of error. It takes 30 days to receive a notification. So when you adopt this in the Constitution, what happens is that the victims are treated fairly. They get rights. They have an opportunity to make certain that they're being notified, and then also to participate in court proceedings. If Bridget Flowers had received notification, if she had known, possibly today she would be living. So it's imperative and almost insanity for the accused to have rights and the victim to have none.
Yeah. Now, before this week, Georgia was one of 15 states that had not passed a version of Marsy's Law.
Yes.
This week, Oklahoma did.
Yes.
So that's 14 states now,
states
including
down.
Georgia. Why not? Why don't you think it's passed here?
I think You know, I'm not certain why Georgia is so behind. There's so many different reasons, but what we've noticed is that there's a disparity in terms of counties that do have, there's a particular system that has notification, which is called the VINE. And we've seen the VINE in those 41 states that I mentioned earlier. And the states that don't have the VINE, because there's human error, because when you are doing the system manually, there's room for mistake. But if we have something implemented like the VINE system, then we've noticed that the people are notified. What's happening, it's in 7 counties right now in the state of Georgia. So those rural areas that don't have instituted the VINE system, that don't have that, currently have that, then, you know, they're notified. Sometimes they're not notified. What happens when someone takes off work? What happens when someone is missing? What happens when someone just doesn't get the information? Human error makes room for error.
Right.
So I believe that that's the problem. We just need a system that that goes across the board. That every consistency is an excellent example of what is needed now.
So, Anne, as we wrap this up, what sorts of rights are we talking about for these victims' families?
Well, our Senate bill sponsor was Senator John Kennedy, and he did an excellent job of clarifying. Victims need the right to know about bond hearings, to be able to be present, to have a voice in the proceedings, and not to be left out. And the most important part is enforceability. You can have a right, but if the right is not enforceable, and if your right is violated and you can't enforce that, then it really isn't a right. Right now, the accused and the criminal have enforceable constitutional rights, but crime victims do not in Georgia. And that's the main thing we're trying to achieve.
So this would basically enshrine it in the Constitution.
That's right.
It would be for the voters to decide, right?
Yes, it would be on, once we pass the House next year in 2018, it will be on the 2018 ballot for the voters of Georgia to decide.
And you guys aren't going to quit, right? Until
No,
it
absolutely not.
passes.
We can't victimize the victim twice.
Victims deserve an equal voice in Georgia.
Well, thank you, ladies, for explaining Marsy's Law and why you're pushing for it so hard in Georgia. We appreciate that very much.
Thank you so much.
When Public Affairs on Peach returns, a former DeKalb judge and prosecutor weighs in on the issue. We'll be back.